Man, these folks don't like the heat.
I'm telling you, and I can't complain because Lisa's not here.
Oh, so you don't like the heat?
So the problem is that I don't know how to do anything in my house because it's all been programmed by other folk and not allowed to touch it.
Hold on. I think I might have actually took us live. So we talking about heat in the house.
We talking about the heat. You know what I'm saying?
We here a little early. I thought I had to hit Zoom and YouTube have synced up their stream buttons now. So
I love that.
So when you hit it on one, now it goes to the other. It used to be that you hit live on Zoom.
Yeah.
But then YouTube.
But then YouTube would do the whole thing.
Go on YouTube and you have to.
I like the innovation. I look. I am not mad at them for actually starting to work together because it makes what we do here that much easier. And now people get to hear about why why we are both, like, you and I literally are probably 2 miles from each other, but you're in short sleeve and I am in a sweatshirt right now.
Right. That's right.
Because you, as we found out when I came over there to help you move in, and you were like putting in your thermostat, and we were working on the thermostat thing. Right. Like I don't touch that at my house. Like I don't touch the thermostat in my house. I don't know. People come in the house like, I'm cold. It's like I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how to touch it. Because every time I touch it, somebody comes looking for me like, did you touch the thermostat? Did you change the temperature? So I don't change the temperature. But of course, here I am now. Like my wife is out of town this weekend, and I'm freezing in this house, and I don't really know what to do. So
you say, so you're just gonna act like it doesn't exist.
Sweatshirt. I'm gonna just put the sweatshirt on. I'm gonna just add layers to it because it's, all intents and purposes for Texas, it's cold out there today. You know what I mean?
It's pretty chilly.
Yeah. And I'm surprised because you got people coming in and out of your house right now. So
they're not. What they're doing is outside stuff. So they're predominantly.
They're just going around. They don't have to come.
Yeah, they're not going through the building. They're not going through the building.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm kind of glad we get on here early because we can kind of get moving a little bit. People start to make in.
It's kind of cool. We get the official start here in just a minute. As we try to get a few folks in. What's up, Brian? I see you in the house.
Brian's in the house. What's going on, man? Good to see you.
I do see you.
Brian, if you are watching this, you ought to share it. Let other people know so they can get in here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I know you come in here and are able to hang out. Let's see. What do you mean never know about preachers these days? I don't know what that means.
He's like, I guess that means that we don't know nothing about thermostats. I don't know. That maybe that's what he was getting at.
I'm not. I don't even know if I can officially call myself a preacher anymore.
Well, no, you preacher.
I do preach. It's just I think for the stereotypical understanding of what pastors and preachers do, like
I'm
just not
preacher.
I'm not stereotypical. I don't have I'm not in a building every Sunday. Yeah, I'm not on a street corner. This is the street corner right here. Like this is the 2021 street corner, right, where we yell and scream and people ignore us. That's it. Hey, did you notice I'm repping all this?
They walk by.
Have you seen all this gear? I just noticed I'm repping all this stuff. I got a threaded cup.
I know
here.
You got all the things, and you got the threaded, the color. I don't have a color commentary thing. I do have.
I see your threaded hat in the back behind you.
I got a threaded hat.
I mean, is that color commentary?
I have a. Yeah, that's a threaded hat, and I think I have a color commentary hat, and then I have a threaded shirt that I was ready to put on, but then we had to work out the stuff with the contractors, and then it just didn't happen. Is what I'm saying. It didn't happen. So
yes. So Brian, I'm seeing your comments here. Yes, the weather will change in Texas. I imagine. So Friday is my it's my ice cream day. It's when I go and eat ice cream. So I like it to be warm. And what I'm imagining, because the sun is out, is that I'm gonna be sitting on my front porch later this afternoon, eat my ice cream in the warmth, is what I'm hoping to do. So I'm with you on that. And yes, you would say y'all aren't technically inclined. Here's the thing: is Antoine is very technically inclined. I am the one who leans on Antoine for the inclinations.
for the
technicalness,
technical inclinations.
inclinations.
I am growing increasingly. Whatever the decline, I don't know. Whatever the
You're on the decline for
is.
technically declined.
I mean, I'm here and
that's
I'm
a
doing
good term. I'm technically declined.
I'm technically declining, because I'm no longer keeping up with all the inclinations. Like this Facebook Meta thing, I'm completely out on.
You're out,
I think a lot of people are out on it just because Mark Zuckerberg seems like a bot when he's talking.
That's
like
fair.
It doesn't seem like a real person is talking to me in that commercial. And then they have that other weird commercial where the painting comes alive, and I'm like, something about this commercial. It's unsettling, and I don't appreciate it. I'm out on it.
I don't appreciate
you bringing this level of unsettle in my life. So, is there anyone else, right, who's seen that crazy? If you know what I'm talking about, the Facebook with the beast on it, so I think it's a tiger or something like that, and then it looks like it's about to eat on this wildebeest, or not wildebeest, this whatever livestock of some sort, and then it just comes alive, and then they're talking. I mean, they're not talking, but they're dancing around. Anyway, it's unsettling, and I was out on it. And I'm like, I'm out on it. So this meta thing, no bueno.
I will tell you, from a technical standpoint, I know we can get in here. We're just kind of keep it moving, but I've been reading a lot of stuff on, just the virtual reality space. And I was actually trying to get my son to get this, I don't know if it's a game or whatever, some sort of application on Oculus where this guy has basically changed his, because you and I, we have like multiple screens and different things going in our spaces, where he just kind of got rid of all his multiple screens, and he just kind of puts on this virtual helmet and he works with his screens that way, kind of like Iron Man, you know what I mean, kind of grabbing stuff. Yeah. So I'm trying to get in on that, because that just feels like a space where I keep, as I read more and more about this technical piece, I mean, this movie Ready Player One, that is not fiction, that is real.
You think that's what Meta's trying to do? I think.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, every minute I'm like, wait a second, we are literally going to be living our lives in another space here pretty soon.
Before we know it, it's going to be the Matrix.
I know, and I don't.
Just be batteries.
It'll just be batteries.
But later on,
you gonna take the pill? I can't remember now. It's the
blue pill. The red. I can't remember which one's the right one.
I don't know.
Whatever the reality one. I don't know.
It doesn't.
Whatever.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And we in here, you are listening to Colored Commentary Live. That's right. Colored Commentary Live. How you
want to do an official? Everybody?
Oh, I'll do an official
start.
That's right.
Official. Right. And we got the music start, and then
I can get it. I can play it on my machine over here. It'll just be broken up and stuff. So the official start is, hey, everybody, how you doing out there in Colored Commentary land? You are listening to Colored Commentary, and this is a Colored Commentary Live, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity and culture. I'm your host, Marcus Lloyd, and with me, as always, is Mr. Antoine Malone. Antoine, say hello to the people who are listening via the podcast, but also listening in the live version as well. So
what's up, podcast land? What's up, YouTube land? Those of you who don't know that we're on YouTube, you need to know. You have to go search, though, because we don't have 100. We don't have 100 subscribers yet, so we can't just say youtube.com/colored commentary, which is what we want to say. So if you would help us get to 100, then we could get that done. So if you're listening to this on your podcast, then go and like stuff and subscribe to stuff, because that helps us in lots of ways. But welcome there. Welcome to the chat room, Ken, Brian, and others. Good to see you guys joining us today. Share this link if you would, and invite other people who might be interested in this conversation. I think what we're going to talk about today is a very important thing to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. And just to go back, you were talking about getting people to subscribe. It's not, we got to just put some time into that, right? So we're going to get some folks, we're going to get people to subscribe. You are listening to this on the podcast. We need 50 more people to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So Antoine, what do they need to do? Like, if they're ready to subscribe, they just go to YouTube, right? And they will then what to make sure?
Search Colored Commentary, and then look for our little logo. You'll see the little white background logo with the multicolored microphone, So that's what you'll want to look for. And then click on it and make sure you see our faces, and then hit subscribe. It's a
subscribe. Okay, we getting it.
It's very,
we're gonna
very
get it done.
easy.
We're gonna get it
Very
done
easy.
before the end of the year. We're gonna get it done. Well, I don't know when this is gonna be released, but we're gonna get it done. 50 subscribers, get them out there. We're gonna get it done just to get us up to 100. We've done this before. We did this with likes, I think, with color commentary, and people were just responding quick. And now we're just out of the wazoo on that. So moving to this new venue of this in-person space is always a difficult one here, but we love the lives. Excited to be in here. We are desirous to get connected to the people, so that's why we are doing a sort of a dual podcast live version, and it's so that people can come in and they can help engage the conversation and help us even adjust the conversation as we go along. So if those of you who are listening, again, if you want to be a part of the conversation of color commentary, check out our lives. They are I think it's I'm trying to think which one it is because we had Thanksgiving. This month is a little different. The third Friday of this month, because we had the holidays, and it'll be probably the same in December once we get the holidays going. But usually it's going to be that last Friday of the month that we go live. So jump in, come and be a part. Obviously, if you are a part of the Facebook group, you'll also see that. If you aren't getting emails from Threaded, it's because you're not a part of our newsletter. You're not a part of our database. So we want you to get in there, go to wearethreaded.org and sign up and just give us your name and email. And then you'll be able to keep abreast of all the things that are going on, not just with Color Commentary, but also with Threaded, which is the organization that powers all of this. It is a biblical racial reconciliation organization that inspires relationships, reconciliation, and collaborative action amongst the diverse body of Christ. And here's the thing, Antoine, can an organization, I'm gonna just get into it, right?
Let's go.
You want to get into it? Having an organization that is committed to talking about race and racial reconciliation, having a live podcast, a regular podcast that's talking about, you bringing my voice in there, having a podcast that's talking about racial issues, people talking about racial issues at a hand, is that divisive?
Yeah.
Is it? You just answered the question. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been a great show.
And thank you for hanging out.
Thank you for hanging out.
That we've had this conversation.
Is it divisive? Well, let's start this way. Have you ever been called divisive in this conversation?
Yeah. Yes. And yeah to the acknowledgement that you've asked a question, and yes to the actual question. No, absolutely. I've gotten emails and text and such from people. It's hard to say regularly. I would say often enough that I'm like, wow, that the conversation around race is a divisive conversation that drives people further from each other more than it drives people to each other, and that I am participant in that division, and by being part of this conversation. So yes, I have been called a divider.
A divider. Yes. Yeah. I will. I'm not going to second it, because then I would be seconding what you said that you have been called. But I'm gonna come with you on that and say I have also been called divisive. Actually more than I'd like to admit. So the question becomes, like, I think there's lots of questions when you start to think, is, as we talked about for the title of this, is this social justice work divisive? Is it becoming divisive? And I think the word divisive is the word you have to kind of start to think about. So what does that mean when people say divisive? What do you think are some of the meanings that people are throwing out when they're saying divisive? What does that mean to them? How are they articulating that?
Yeah, and that's chat too. Like, let you guys jump in and tell us, what do you think people mean when they say you're being divisive? Mm-hmm. What's the essence of that? I think what they really mean is that you're being disruptive. Okay, and they're confusing division with disruption, and they're associating the potential disruptive nature of the social justice or the racial reconciliation or the racial justice conversation,
racial conversation period,
with disruption, by calling it divisive. I think there's a subtle sort of connection between disruption equaling division.
Well, it is a synonym.
Conflict equaling division, and I don't. They may be synonymous in some way, but I don't know that that relationship is always a direct. I don't know there's always a direct relationship between disruption and division.
Well, I think I just even thinking about going to the dictionary, and again, who wrote the dictionary? No, I'm just kidding. There is the synonym. I'll say the thesaurus of this particular thing. The synonym, when you look up divisive, one of the synonyms is disruptive. Another synonym that it has there is alienating. And I think the question also is when you hear disruptive, when you hear divisive, those usually aren't used in a term of where it's a positive thing, right? There's usually a pejorative. It's kind of a pejorative phrase, like you're being disruptive, you're being divisive. And I wonder if that's a fair representation of fully as far as divisive is concerned. Because I would imagine, right? Like imagine there are times that being disruptive is actually a good thing.
Right.
Right. I mean,
right. And as is always the case, and it's a running joke kind of in my house, but it's a thing. I am always neutralizing terms because because we often apply these negatives and positive things to terms, and division by itself as a concept is not a negative. If I take something and divide it, that's not negative. That's not necessarily negative. So division isn't negative, but it is in the sense that it is if the other persons that are coming and making the accusation to us, it's negative if they're saying, hey, you're saying you want to be united or a unifier, but actually what you're doing is being divisive. So I guess in some ways, given the context of the conversation, someone could say, hey, to call someone divisive is to call them ineffective or I don't know, not able to do what they're trying to do, not successful in achieving the goal they set out. Because most people, when we're talking about racial justice and racial reconciliation, what we're really trying to do is figure out how to bring people together and in such a way that we would live each other in honoring ways, which sounds like unifying.
Yeah.
And so the accusation is, well, the conversation is actually doing the opposite of that. So I think division is negative. I mean, division is neutral. I think to call something divisive isn't always a bad thing, but to call the racial conversation divisive feels like a bad thing because it's supposed to be a unifying conversation for racial reconciliation and racial justice. So I guess that's the accusation.
Yeah. And even there, like, as I think about like racial unity and racial reconciliation, a lot of times those terms get traded out for one another, but they really have different definitions in a way, right? Like different things that go along with it, right? So there is an idea of being racially unified, right? Which is, not necessarily uniform, but kind of being unified under the same sort of thought processes, living in an agreement, combining the totality into a particular whole, right? Like the Trinity is an example of great unity. You've got three persons that do different things, have different jobs, but they are unified as one to do kind of the meta thing, right? That is out there. But from a reconciliation standpoint, it's not always about, I think, like foundationally, it's not always about unity as much as it's about making things right. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so
Yeah.
sometimes, so you're reconciling, right? You're like, I'm trying to make things right here. I'm trying to bring people together around what is right, or where they were broken apart. I am trying to bring them together, but bring them together in such a way that all the things that were wrong were made right. And it's in alleviating or making the things that were wrong, making those things right, is what actually brings the unity. And so when you start talking about racial reconciliation, but you start saying things that make people want to walk away, part of the reason they want to walk away is because they don't want to do the things that are going to draw us together in actual unity. And so there's this divisiveness. You're saying these things that are keeping me from wanting to actually come together and do the things necessary to make things right, and I'm going the opposite direction. So that's divisive. But the thing, but it's, now I'm kind of losing the strand of this a bit.
Well,
But there's
yeah,
this,
because well, it's kind of like yeah, if you're not willing to go, the people who are saying that are like, hey, I don't want to do what you're asking me to do,
right.
and you're insisting, and your insistence makes me want to leave the conversation, and
Right.
therefore is divisive.
It's divisive. Yeah.
And that division is based not on the goal of the conversation, but upon the feelings you have about that goal and whether you feel like you want to be a part of it or not. So, the goal of racial reconciliation is obviously to reconcile, which is not a divisive or, that's a unit, ultimately ends in a unifying space. So you can't say that the goal itself is divisive or the conversations that are had around that are designed to be divisive. If they are not designed to be divisive, but have divisive results, then the issue is not the motivation of the thing, but some execution or
Yeah.
response to what's being done.
Yeah.
Either someone is doing and saying or acting in a way that doesn't actually is not effective, or they are being effective, and those who are receiving that information have no interest in
Yep.
receiving it and
Yep.
decide rather that they want to go a completely different direction, and therefore that equals division.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No, I look, and that you could just get extremely biblical on that. I mean, there are so many ways in which what you just talked about works out biblically. I mean, everybody wants to talk about Jesus, right? But ultimately, Jesus was Jesus, and really the apostles that came after were creating a kind of divide, right, in the
right,
midst of what had previously been thought of in Jewish culture as the way in which God was going to interact on the earth, right? God had from the very beginning said, "Hey, you're not going to just. This is not just going to be about the Israelites. It's going to be about the entire world." And your job is not to be a people and just kind of hoard all that stuff and build a country club where you're just hanging out, but your job is to actually represent me to other folks, and so that they are drawn in. And so Jesus comes, right, and he's now creating almost this divide, and says it's not just about being Jewish anymore, it's about being a follower of me. And so the disciples, as they maneuvered through the Old Testament, or excuse me, the New Testament, right, particularly through Acts, you saw them going into synagogues and saying, "Hey, it is not just about this anymore. There are other things that God is calling us to, a kind of reconciliation with God through Christ. And in
yeah,
doing so, this actually reconciles us with the entire world." The Jewish congregations, or the Jewish folks in the synagogue, many of them did not want to hear that. And so they fought against this message,
yeah,
and it was considered a divisive message, right?
right,
So that's
right,
what you're talking about. So in the midst of what we were talking about, it's very possible that those things that people consider divisive are actually a kind of more productive work of unity, but seem divisive because you don't want to go after this kind of unity because it costs you something,
right.
right? If
And
I'm
that's where Jesus says, "Hey, behold, I bring to you a sword." That's
yes,
what he's talking about. And people are like, "I bring a sword." That means I'm gonna bring judgment. And I'm not entirely convinced that verse is about judgment. I think it's about what you just discussed. This concept that there's a way that you see the world that you want to hold on to, and I'm going to bring a way to see the world that is different than that. And you're going to have to make a choice whether you go with me or you go with your way of seeing the world. And in that sense, I'm bringing something that's going to lead to a division. Some people are going to hold on to the old Jewish way of viewing Jews and Gentiles, but I'm bringing a new thing that's going to change, how Jews and Gentiles interface with each other and produce this entirely new kingdom, this new ethnos, so forth and so on. That's all kind of wrapped there. So Jesus brings a sword. Jesus, obviously goes at him in multiple kinds of ways. So it kind of goes to what we were saying, like division in itself is not something that needs to be seen as super negative. And perhaps any constructive progress, you could say, is the product, or at least has the potential accusation of division inlaid inside of it. Anytime I come and say, hey, we're going to do a new thing, somebody wants to keep the old thing. And in so doing, it could create division, change, disruption. Again, I'm back on disruption. Mm-hmm. Disruption could create this kind of division. I see Brian's active in the text.
Yeah, Brian is active in the text in sort of the same mode where Brian tends to be active in the chat. I don't know if we're talking about any of those things that Brian's talking about specifically, but we can circle to. Yeah, there's some aspects to it.
We'll get to it in a minute because I do think that's where the rubber grips the road. What he's getting at is the reason it might be divisive to white people particularly is because it just seems I'm going to use my own terms here. It seems scripted in the sense that the white persons feel like the only role they get to play in this conversation is to be the bad guy, and therefore the thing that you're saying, this ideal that you're saying you want to pursue, isn't actually what you want to pursue. You actually just want to rag on white people and blame them for all of your problems over and over again. And if as soon as we fix one, you just come up with another one and another one. And then that person's like, look, you don't actually want division. You just want a scapegoat. And I think that is the way a lot of white folks and some black folks even would approach this conversation where it pertains to social justice, believing that those who are pursuing it aren't actually, I think what they're accusing you of is not actually pursuing justice, but looking for a scapegoat for all of your problems and never being actually satisfied.
And I think that it's interesting because I do think that in this conversation that majority of folks who are maybe being accused of being divisive, well, no, that's not a fair statement, but I'll say it anyway. I know that I've seen a lot of folks historically, and even now, that those who are on the side of, hey, we need to be thinking about social justice, they're the ones that are being accused of being divisive. Now, historically, the majority of those folks who have been having and kind of beating that drum have been people of color. So it feels as though when people talk about this idea of, hey, stop being divisive, they're talking predominantly to people of color, and the people who are making the accusation of what is divisive tends to be predominantly those who are from the white persuasion. And so it becomes this whole weird conversation around, like, is there something in the midst of the conversation that is that needs to be dealt with as far as is there a racial stereotype or a racial I'm losing the word here all of a sudden, but is there some sort of racial category that's being played out where certain people are playing a role just because they represent a certain racial group? You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm a person of color, if I'm saying these things, is it part of my script to say this way, right? And if I'm white, is it part of my script to, when I hear a person of color say this, that I say these kinds of things, right? Like, I'm gonna just use Brian as an example. He's not quite like this, but there are a few people like this. So is what Brian's saying on the text here in the chat, is this kind of a script that has been given to white people to say when they hear two brothers on a show saying certain things, that say, hey, you guys are talking about this, and I know, Brian, this is not you, so I'm just using your words because they're here. That when they hear us talking about social justice, that their script is, hey, you guys want to talk about social justice, but all you really want to do is just keep giving us grievances over and over again, and there's no win for us. You just want to categorize all of us as villains, and there's no win for us in this, right? Like, so there's two scripts coming at each other, and how can those scripts be adjusted so that there can be this proposed unity that everybody's working on, right?
Yeah.
How do those scripts get adjusted?
I think there's a miss for those, and if you're listening with the preacher under the sound of my voice, right?
Under the sound of my voice. Yeah, that's
those
good.
under the sound of my voice. No, but if you're listening to me, if you're white and you're like, man, this social justice conversation is more negative than positive, or it's more divisive than unifying, I would say to you that part of the pathway to it being more unifying is to take it, in my opinion, this is my own words, maybe, because this may, I don't know how close this aligns with colored commentary and threaded and all that, but take it less personally, if you will. Like, I think so much of what we're talking about is it becomes a personal attack. And so because you feel personally attacked, you can't concentrate on the subject matter, because it's just, all you know is, oh, you said I was the bad guy, I can't do it. When the conversation is not always, and for those who are actually pursuing justice and unity, the conversation is less about you being the bad guy and more about an acknowledgement of the issues that are before us. And so what we need you to think about is what's in front, what is the issue we're actually talking about, not whether you are the bad agent in that issue or not. Because it feels like when I talk to white people, the only thing they're concerned with where it comes to race, not all white people, but many, the only thing they're concerned with is whether they are on the right or the wrong side of the conversation. They're not actually concerned, many of them, with actually dealing with the issue itself. What they want to know is, do you see me as an enemy and the cause of that issue, or do you see me as not that? And as long as you don't see me as the cause of the issue, I feel fine, wrap my hands, walk off, and I may not do anything to actually solve it. I just want to absolve this thing about me being the bad guy. And so then when they don't feel that, then the conversation becomes divisive because they're looking for that satisfaction. I am not the problem. When I wish that people would just sort of take a second, step back from the personal attack or the personal perspective, if you will, of that, and just look at the issue itself. And, you know, like Brian mentions here, he says, you know, the language of it can be divisive. It can be divisive if everything that happens bad to people of color is laid at the feet of white supremacy or whiteness. Then it becomes divisive. I would agree with that. I would also agree, though. I would also say, though, that not the Black community isn't blaming all its problems on white and Black, but on racial issues, but that there are a few that absolutely are the result of racial issues, and those need attention, and we can't ignore them, or magnify or you know, sort of expand the conversation to be, well, because you pointed out one issue means you must think all problems come from white. Just hear what's being said and look at it objectively and take these emotions out of it for a second and just get to problem solving. I just wish we could get to problem solving, and it just doesn't. These emotions get in the way, this personal attack and how we look at each other. And I think this conversation about division has everything to do with whether white people feel like they're the villain or not in a particular scenario, and not very much to do with the actuality of the problems in society.
Yeah, and part of that is if I can say it as easy as possible, is what we're talking about. You know, although obviously, just like take the emotion out, be able to see it sort of engaged.
Well, and real quick, of course, I would say that, right? Because I tend to,
I get that.
I tend to live in that space anyway, and so I realize that's not reality.
Well, but here's the deal: it's yes and right. Yeah, we need to kind of take the emotion, but we also need to understand why certain emotion is in the space. You know what I mean? And I say that because a lot of times in the midst of this is a divisive. A lot of times what's kind of captured with that or brought alongside that conversation is a conversation about tone, right? Where particularly I'll say it this way: both sides have a kind of tone. I think one side's tone sets off the other, right? So I'll start with the tone of where I can speak from because I'm on the side of people of color. A lot of times where we are in this conversation is that we're hearing from people of color and they have a kind of tone that is less fluffy in the way that they say it. It's a bit more right to the point, right? They're not trying to center the other side's feelings, but they're trying to actually get attention into and to kind of go right at the issue. And many times this tone creates an environment that people start to dismiss whatever they're talking about as divisive because the tone sounds that way. The approach or the methodology in which they are doing it kind of breeds that of where it could be divisive. And look, I think we can go right to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail and find everything we're talking about articulated in that particular letter. If you haven't read that, you need to go Google it, and you can find the letter. It'll take you take you a little bit to read. It's phenomenal. But in there, he is actually responding to moderate white pastors who have put out this letter in the newspaper calling Dr. King sort of this outside agitator, right? And they're like, we like this, we understand the cause of which you're doing it. We just don't like the way you're doing it. We don't like how you're saying it. We don't like your approach, all those things. And so he's commenting on that. And I think part of what he comments on is kind of tone, where people are like, they're saying to him, hey, you need to kind of, your talk is divisive, your tone is divisive in this, and you just need to say it a little bit nicer and sweeter so that people can all hear it. And he's going, do you know, and he kind of says it in this kind of light, they also telling, hey, just wait, these things will come along eventually. He's saying, do you know what it's like to have to live in such a way that when your kids drive by a gas station that doesn't allow them to come into it? Do you know what it's like explaining that to them? Do you know what it's like when they see commercials about, amusement parks, and you have to tell them that you're not allowed there? Like that is a frustration that exists in the midst of people of color. And like there are Native American, Asian American, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans who come to this conversation and they bring a tone that's very aggressive sounding, and that becomes a divisive tone. But if you've been experiencing what people of color have been experiencing in this country for as long as they have, and just look at all the ways I've experienced it, I think we can allow for some tone that may have a bit of an edge to it that's a little different than for those who maybe been in power. But what we're also seeing is now, as people are being on the white side are being sort of pushed and shoved a bit, their tone is coming up really quick as well. And so now we have these two tones coming at each other, and it creates a space in which it's very difficult because emotions are there. As you're talking about, it becomes a space that's very difficult for people to have really good rational conversations because both sides are allowing the emotions to come.
They're kind of triggered. Both sides are triggered in a sense and trying to communicate tough, urgent, complicated issues whilst triggered. And it can feel like conflict, but I think rational, problem-solving minded people can have divisive conversation,
quote unquote
divisive conversations, meaning conversations that are disruptive, conversations that can produce conflict, with the goal of understanding that everybody's trying to achieve the same one thing, which is a society where everyone has the opportunities that America affords it, should afford it, according to its constitution. And therefore, we're all trying to figure out how to do that, working from the stations and the places that we are. In other words, what the scripture says, if we think well enough of each other, then we can bring these disruptive, conflicting conversations, and it can lead to progress, because everything that goes to progress suffers from a kind of destruction, disruptive, conflicting process. Whatever, you can't go to something better if you stay where you are.
Stay where you are.
Yeah. And to deal with where you are, you have to disrupt it or tear it down at least a little bit in order to move forward. And some people say, well, you can just add to stuff. In this scenario, it's not just an add. You're going to have to look, evaluate, again, all those things are in that same, yes, that's agitating. Yes, that's annoying. Yes, nobody wants it. If things are fine, I remember in my IT world where I used to do career stuff, and you're like, man, this version of this software is good. It's a
Yeah.
stable version. We finally got to a stable version, and somebody comes in with a new patch or a new version, and people are like, look, I don't want to go to the new version because the version I am currently using
Yes.
is working. I know the
Working for
bugs
me.
in this one, and I can work around those. You're going to introduce new bugs and new problems. I'm not interested in your new version of the software. And companies have learned they'll let that go for a little bit, but at some point, you got to kill the support for the old software. And at that point, you're like, look, we're killing support. We're no longer supporting that old way of doing it. If you're going to keep that, you're on your own. We're moving forward. And in a sense, that creates, what I'm saying? That creates this tension and this conflict that should be a part of the conversation. And I think I think that people are naive to think that you're going to have a race conversation, as complicated as one is in America, without having passionate, urgent, emotional methodologies of communicating their points and issues. We should walk in the room knowing that's going to be the case. That can't be the indication of divisiveness. It has to be something more than that, something deeper than that, not just tone or methodology or what have you. And I feel like a lot of people, as careful as I think you and I are with our words, and I think we try to be very careful with our words.
Sure. Therapy. For sure.
Divisive is the furthest thing I think you can. I mean, unless I don't think you and I are divisive at all. In a sense, in our methodology. Yeah. Again, the outcome is, hey, whether you agree or you don't agree, that's one thing. Whether you take that disagreement and allow it to cause you to go away from the conversation altogether, now all of a sudden you made me leave the conversation, therefore you're divisive. And I didn't make you do anything. You responded to the data the way you responded, and you left. So I don't. I guess it's safe to say I'm offended by the title of being divisive, because I don't like it. It's not at all. I spend great amount of time thinking through and trying to work and come up with ways to bring people together despite their ignorance, both in mind and attitude, and trying to create simple pathways for people to understand each other. And for someone to call me divisive, does cut at the core. And I'm not a big fan. So it's not at all what I'm doing. So maybe I'm being a little too open sword about that.
No. Well, again, it just depends on what you think about. Like, I think, again, in some situations, being called divisive is actually a compliment, right? I mean, if you are in a situation where good things are happening, like where the situation is good and everybody agrees, this is really good, and you come in and disrupt that situation, to kind of keep it from being the good situation, then people will say you're divisive, and that seems like a very negative thing. But if the situation is bad and you come in to disrupt it, then you're a hero, right? I'm divisive in the midst of this, right? Let's just take two families. You got a family, mom and dad, kids, healthy, everybody's getting along. There's nothing going on underneath the surface. Like, this family loves one another. And you come in and you're starting to try to get the family to fight amongst each other where they never had to fight before. And maybe just taking little things that they did. Yeah. Like, hey, you left your clothes out on the floor. Hey, don't you know how disrespectful that is for a child to leave their clothes out on the floor? For a mother, aren't you really upset with your child because they're disrespecting you by saying this thing? And now you're breaking up a happy home, right? Like, you coming out, there's a good home, right? But take another family in which the dad is overbearing and he's actually sexually molesting all his daughters, right? And he's beating his wife, but he's rich, right? He's got all this money. And so the daughters don't want to leave because where are they going to go, right? And so they're not supposed to talk about it. They don't talk about it. But then you get somebody come in there and they start disrupting, like, nah, son, you can't do this to these ladies. We're going to bring in people. You touch them again, we're going to blah, blah, blah. Hey, this dude is being divisive, and disruptive, but in a good way. He's keeping bad things from happening to this person is keeping bad things from happening to these children. Right. And so what I think is interesting is, and I'm going to say this, I'm not sure if this is correct. So this is first draft. If you think things are going well in this country, having a conversation about race is disruptive and divisive in your eyes. If you think that we've got a race problem that needs to be fixed, then you feel like coming to the conversation to mention that is not being is being divisive and disruptive in a good way. You see what I'm saying? And so what's interesting is I'm looking at Brian's comments on the text. He says, I think many people have tapped out of the dialogue because of exhaustion. And I agree. Like, I actually think both sides, there's a tap out, right? But one side gets to tap out and be just fine, right? The operating system, as you're saying, is created in such a way that they feel pretty comfortable in its operating system. And so that's why I think many times people like myself and like you get called divisive, and predominantly by people who are white, not all the time, because I've been called by Black people as well, and Hispanic people as well.
And Asian.
And usually these Black people, though, who I'm dealing with are usually in a pretty good situation, right? They tend to be from the sort of bourgeoisie version, the place to which I even grew up myself. And they feel like they've got what they need. And so they're not super struggling. So they're like, hey, don't say anything because you're going to ruin our spot here. You're being divisive. You say that, now I go back to work and I can't go to work the way I was working before because they're looking at me a certain way. You're doing that. And that happened during Dr. King's time. He said that was part of the group that was difficult. He had to deal with this. Some of those African-Americans who had received some of the benefits of being close to networks of whiteness and whatnot. So I think it's just perspective. But I would say to Brian, like he says, I think many people have tapped out of the dialogue because of exhaustion. I would say that I think if you're white, you can tap out and keep it moving. And it's not that big a deal. But if you're a person of color, currently, I'm going to say currently because the times are changing. If you're a person of color in the current situation, like, you can't tap out of this thing because it actually affects all the things that you're doing. And so if you're being held underwater, like, you are going to fight to get to the air. You're going to fight to get to the air. And so it is all, it's all in the comments.
And I was just to what you're saying. On some level, it's even more pressing to be a person of color right now because it feels like the wheels are actively turning against you in the last 5 to 6 years. And as opposed to maybe what it was before that, I would speak of myself. I say, man, things are tough. There are things that need to be dealt with, but there are things that need to be dealt with, but I don't feel like the system's actively against me at the moment. It's actively against others, but not actively against sort of me. I don't feel like there's a resurgence of white supremacy or what have you. Didn't see it on we didn't see it explicitly. Yeah. But here recently, man, it feels like, the wheels are turning now in the opposite direction. And therefore the urgency has been ratcheted up. And so, yeah, you're right, man. You don't get to, we can't get to just walk away from it if you're going to be someone who cares about your children, because I'm looking at my kids and I'm like, they've got to grow up in a world where opportunity should be available to them. And it's looking like it could potentially, their opportunities could be hampered, and that it's getting worse more than getting better, And I would say this about the exhaustion real quick. I'll let you go. Yeah. About the exhaustion, I think the reason people are exhausted is because people are seeing the conversation as divisive instead of just accepting the reality of the conversation. Yeah. And so what people are tired of is whether the conversation is actual conversation or not. They're tired of arguing about whether race is a problem. And so, and over, the argument is about whether race is a problem, as opposed to what are the problems and how do we fix the problems, the racial problems in our society. And once you finally, after weeks or whatever long it takes to get someone to believe that there is an actual racial problem, then all of a sudden it's, well, we'll never get rid of race. Okay, so there was no race problem. So you went from no race problem in America, which was a state that you believed was real, right? Then we found that there is race. Okay, so we finally agreed that there's race problems, but now, well, we'll never get out of race. Oh, wait. First, it was no race to begin with. So you clearly believe in a state of no racial problems. Anyway, there's more we could do there. But I think that's what people are tired of. And of course you have influential minds and teachers taking statements and making them personal, gaslighting, as people would say, bringing out this emotional response that is unnecessary to real problem real problem solution.
Well, and you're right. You're right. I mean, it's the conversation about divisive becomes the work. Like now everybody's working on not being called divisive or keeping people from being divisive, as opposed to actually doing the core of the work that was making people come out and say anything that would even be considered divisive. And that's a trick. I think that's a trick. I think that's in the toolbox.
Yeah,
right?
And
because
and
if
real
I can,
quick, yeah, Brian says exhaustion comes from never-ending list of grievances, which is what you're saying. I wanted you to comment on that in addition to what you're saying. Go ahead though, but I wanted to bring that because you're about to. If I'm tracking your mind, it'll go there. But go ahead.
I've lost my train of thought now.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. I failed you. My bad. Well, this is my thing, Brian. I think that's a hopeless way of thinking about the racial conversation.
Yeah.
It is hopeless to say that, hey, there's going to be a never-ending list of grievances. It is hopeful to say, what are the grievances?
Yes.
Oh, there are more of them than I realized. Okay, well, let's get them all out. Let's figure out where all of the bones are in this yard, and let's go ahead and dig up these bones. And when someone says, hey, there's more than you think, you're like, I'm only comfortable with 3 bones. You're like, well, it's more than 3. Oh, well, then now it's never ending. Again, that's an emotional that's an emotional response, and it's not a response that's designed to produce problem solving. It just says, hey, I just want to feel good about what I'm doing, and too many grievances means that I'm not going to feel good. And I will say this, Brian, and others who are thinking in this way with him or attached to that, there is some validity to people blaming everything on whiteness, on the man, right? It's kind of a joke, even in some ways in the Black community, where you're like, oh, the man. So I do understand a part of that, but I'm telling you that most of the conversations people are having around the racial conversation and trying to figure out what social justice looks like, these are real issues that have been studied, or these are real issues. These are not just they're not to do it to say it as just a unending list of grievances is to cartoonify the experiences of people and make it two-dimensional and animated, as opposed to something that's real and substantial.
Yeah, and that's where I would jump in on that too. Is it definitely should be a point of evaluation. If you're saying that, there's just going to be this list of grievances, it definitely should be a point of evaluation of how am I actually picturing these people, right? Are they human beings, or are they just some sort of caricature in my mind, right? Like, have you actually gone down the list of grievances and it not ended, right? Like, have you actually sat down with people and gone down the list, or are you standing at the starting line of the grievance conversation, assuming that it's never going to do? And if you're assuming that, then that says something about what you think about the people you're dealing with. You believe that these people you're dealing with are not rational people. They're not people who react in many ways the ways most humans do in good personal interaction. Like when my family and when my wife or my kids have a grievance with me, if I was to say to them, keep going, right? What else you got? Like, they're not going to just keep going. Eventually they're going to be like, I think I actually got it out. And if I go, okay, let me take care of these grievances, they're not just going to be like, you know what? Now that dad is taking your grievances, now I'm going to give all these grievances coming out, right? Like, no, but eventually you just got to get them all out there. You can kind of agree or disagree, whatever. But I've even seen times where I've been in situations where that are very difficult, where I've had to be like, okay, keep coming, keep telling me the things that I've done wrong, keep telling me the things I've done wrong. And eventually the person stops, and I'll keep asking, now, is that all? And they go, well, I kind of feel bad, actually. Like, there's kind of just one more thing, they feel bad about it, right? Because these are human beings and they recognize that you can't solve all the problems and they recognize that it's hard, but they really just wanted to kind of get some of those things out. Now you work towards those, but I think it's an evaluation of what are you actually thinking about these people? Do you actually believe them to be real human beings? Or are these just some sort of caricature you're watching on whatever news outlet that you're looking at? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I like the comment Ken is making in the chat. He says history is repeating itself. It makes me think a lot of these conversations, a lot of these accusations, these grievances are the same grievances. It's not like it's a growing list. I mean, there's some lists that grow, but it's not an ever-growing list. It's the same list.
Major categories for sure. Major categories on the list.
But it's the same concepts that's being repeated over and over and over again. And why is it being repeated over and over again? Because the problem hasn't been fully dealt with yet. And as long as we're skating around dealing with the problem's going to continue to persist. And the conversation about that problem will continue to persist, and the grievances will keep showing up. And to the point of the evolution of those, as we've talked about in the past, racism and how it evolves, the evolution of those grievances and the new ways they show up in a society. So, but at the end of the day, like you said, categorically, we're talking about the same stuff we were talking about before, just in different manifestations. And I don't think that, I'm with you. I think it's a beautiful point. Just like, what else? Because eventually it's going to be done. Like the list will be done.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think too, and I know, and I always appreciate Brian being in here. Brian, you got kind of a drum that you beat in here constantly, and so I'll engage in it a little bit. I think when we have these conversations, particularly, let's just say if you're hearing from people of color, there's an assumption that the only conversations people of color are having with white people, right? Like the only thing that they're bringing is that's the kind of the only conversations that they're having, right? Like if anybody who's a part of an ethnic group that happens to be a minority group, they know that inside that minority group or that really global majority group, if you're a Black American, I know sitting in my own family engagements that there's plenty of discussion around why certain people in the Black community are not thriving. We'll have plenty of discussions about it. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about our cousins. We'll talk about family. We'll talk about other folk. We'll be like, man, if that fool would just stop if he stopped smoking weed every day, this wouldn't be a problem, right? If he would just, if she would stop sleeping with everybody in town, this would be a problem, right? So there's a lot of discussion inside the community. Like, and what I think it's funny, it's interesting is people who've never actually been inside the community talk about the community like they know what the community talks about. Right. If you go into Black churches, right, you're going to hear Black churches, Black preachers, like berating the Black community for different things that they're not doing, that they're not supposed to be doing, or that they're supposed to be doing. I mean, berating in a way that you'd be like, well, that's divisive and offensive, right? Like but that's inside of the Black community. Hispanic church, you're going to hear the same stuff. You're going to hear that inside of the community. So when you see a Black person who's on television in front of a microphone saying, hey, here are some of the things that we think society has done to Black people, that's not the only conversation that has been had about what's going on in the Black community. It's just the piece that you're hearing. What may be helpful to the conversation is to have more white people hearing what Black people are talking about behind closed doors. But we know that there's like a closed door mentality in this country, right? Like everybody wants to have their conversations behind these closed doors. And I think that that's where some of this conversation getting out into the light would be helpful, hearing from Black leaders and Black preachers. And we have actually heard from them talking about ways in which Black community should be doing things differently. Bill Cosby got up and said something about the Black community to do differently. President Barack Obama said some things about the Black community to be differently. So we know that there are people who have no problem getting up and saying those things. What I think is also helpful, and I think it's a great point, I think that people would make, is we have to start looking internally instead of just looking externally, right? And I think that would be helpful. I think if the Black community sat back and said, hey, what are some things that we can do to make this situation better? I also think it'd be great if the white community did the same thing. Hey, what are some things we can do to make this situation better? what happens is a lot of finger pointing back and forth. Hey, if the Black community would just figure out this stuff, they'd be good. Hey, if the white community would just do this to be good. I think there's some internal evaluation that we all need to do. And so my challenge to anyone who says, hey, the Black community, needs to, start digging up the bones in their own yards, I would turn it right back and say, dig up the bones in your yard as well. Like do the work, model the work, so that other people can see it. So Black people need to dig up the bones, and white people need to dig up the bones.
Everybody's doing it. Yeah, everybody's doing it, and I'm a testament. Growing up, I heard so much about how the Black community, needed to fortify itself, by making better decisions and prioritizing education and overcome gang culture and the different things that have gone on and continue to go on. Black communities all across this country have nonprofit agencies and boys and girls clubs and all kinds of things
run by Black people, created by Black people.
Yep. And passionate men and women, older, younger, and otherwise, pouring into the lives of Black young men and women, saying, hey, you've got to make better life decisions and to coach them and get them through that. The problem is that those same people know that if they get these Black kids in the right space and heading in the right direction, that they're going to eventually run across the issues that society has put in front of them as a roadblock. And they want to clear those roadblocks because all of that work that they spend in trying to get this person to actually run on this road over here, which could lead to a better way of life. Well, if you get over there and you keep hitting roadblocks, it's going to be easy for that work to be undone. And all of a sudden you got Black people, or you got people in poverty or different types of neighborhoods perpetuating
into the cycle.
Yeah, perpetuating a lifestyle that you've been trying to coach them out of. So what it is it's a collaborative effort to say, hey, we are going to work on our Black communities and some of the issues that we have in those communities, but we can't work on them and get them to a place only to have them to run into the blockades that society has set up. We need you to clear the block. We'll get them running, clear the block. And those are two separate conversations. And you can't be like, well, they're not running, so you clear the block. No, just clear. I'm coming to you about your part of the issue. You deal with that stuff. We'll deal with this stuff on the inside. And I don't think there's many Black people who would say, oh yeah, we're great. We're fine. If the white people get out of the way, we would be fine. Maybe over the long haul, but yeah, I think we are very aware. All communities are aware of the issues in it, because at the end of the day, we're humans and we all exhibit the same sorts of human behavior, whether it's white, Black, or otherwise, given your environment. So so I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking again of Dr. King and just the work that he was doing in the midst of it. There's obviously more civil rights workers, but I think just thinking about him being called divisive. To your point, he was trying to lay the foundation. He was trying to clear the roadblocks for his kids, right? You didn't have the rights to vote, right? Nobody had put in sort of the anti-lynching law, which didn't come up until recently, actually. These obviously schools that were supposed to be integrating and right to education and all these separated spaces, like clearing the roadblocks. And what he talks about is this difference between, and we've said it before, negative and positive peace, right? This conversation around divisive is all in the midst of what he was talking about, right? Negative peace is when something terrible is going on under the surface, but those on the surface are trying to keep that from coming out because it will cause chaos and it'll be disruptive and it will be uncomfortable. So we just don't talk about the thing, right? Don't talk about that because that'll bring it up and then it'll be chaos and craziness, right? But positive peace actually leans into the idea of no, that thing underneath the surface, if you don't deal with it, it's going to grow and it's going to explode. It's just going to take a second, one sort of thing that's going to make it ignite. So positive peace says, let's start to deal with this thing that's underneath the surface in small ways and large ways along the way so that we don't have to deal with it all at once when something ignites it. And so that's what we're talking about. This is disruption, this divisiveness that we're talking about, the racial conversation in a country like America that still has these racial divides. To have the conversation about race is a conversation that's trying to disrupt something that is not a good situation, to turn it into a situation, or should I say, it's not a good situation for everyone involved, right? If we want to turn it into a situation where everybody gets a chance to thrive equally, and have very similar, not equal outcomes, but similar outcomes, and definitely equal opportunities to achieve some of these outcomes. That's what the race conversation is about, at least from a social justice standpoint. And to do that, what that means is we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to make some things different. And unfortunately, to your point that you made earlier, Antoine, when you start changing a society that has favored one particular group, and you start changing that society in that group doesn't get 100% of the favor anymore, then that group, it feels like something's being taken away. And so they don't like the conversation. Now it's divisive. You are not making me feel good about being connected to you. So it's a divisive conversation. And I think I think there can be a good and bad divisive. And I think we are in a situation that there needs to be some disruption. And I think even in the church standpoint, the ways in which we as the church have continued to build ourselves up in these segregated environments, and we actually are okay with that. I think if you think through from a prophetic standpoint, when prophets show up, they are bringing disruptive stuff because the church wasn't doing, or the people of God weren't doing what they're supposed to do. And they would be like, this is divisive. Okay, if we're not doing what we're supposed to do, I'm going to go with the thing that we're supposed to do and move us in that direction. If that's divisive and disruptive, so be it. And maybe that's just the prophetic aspect of it. But I guess I'm with you. I'm kind of I'm tired of hearing people getting called divisive and disruptive when they're trying to move people into things that are going to make us look more like the church as opposed to less like the church. Look more like Jesus and what Jesus was doing. Be accused of the same kind of things that Jesus is being accused of, as opposed to being accused of the things that the Pharisees were being accused of. And that's where I think some of that disruption comes in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You look at the Old Testament and the response to the prophets, and it was often the preacher. It was often the priest who's coming and saying, "Hey, you're a problem."
Yeah. You're messing up my spot. You're messing up my spot.
You what you're saying is clearly not what God wants, because it's disruptive. I think you could say, sometimes peace is the absence of disruption, and sometimes peace is the product of disruption. And sometimes, like you gave a great example with the house, with the father who's abusing. Sometimes we got to go in and establish justice through disruption, and it doesn't have to be physical. It just, right now, it's just you just want to have a rational conversation with rational people who can look at stuff and say, yeah, and who exhibit the heart of God and the ethic of the kingdom that says that I'm willing to sacrifice what I have to make things right. And that's everybody's got to do a little bit of that. And if you can't have conversations in the body of Christ that says we got problems and I'm willing to sacrifice to solve them, then there is no hope in the world, because the world won't do that. The world will serve itself at all costs. And that is on display as well. I know we got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to your point that you just made, there's a part of me too, and this is what we do. So I'm kind of downing what we do in some ways. But there's also a point where we got to stop having conversations about conversations that we should be not having. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you were making this point earlier. Like, we can spend all day battling over what the term divisive means and never get to the point of what people are being divisive about. Right. We can sit here, we can be in the moment, kind of blaming sides for X, Y, Z. And that just becomes the scapegoat for not getting involved in doing anything at all. And that's what I don't like about sometimes the way divisive is used, is that I think it's becoming a tool that allows me to be in the conversation and say I'm in the conversation, but not actually do anything because somebody said something that made me not like doing anything, or made me have to take a pause. Or should I be doing this because you said it to me in a way I didn't like it, and so now I shouldn't be doing it? So I think that's the most frustrating part to me about the divisive conversation, is that it's more about the words and the tone as opposed to the cause that brought the words and the tone in the first place. So you were going to say something to help wrap us up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, hey, thanks everybody. Brian, look, there's no problem with the text. I mean, with the chat or anyone else. I know you said, hey, I know I'm chatty or I like to talk. That's what we're doing. That's why we do these lives.
Oh, yeah, sure.
If we didn't want chat, we could just record this without being live. The whole point of being live is for you guys to be in the room and to be a part of the conversation. That is the point of the medium. And so that's what we want to do. But to answer the question, to sort of finalize, is the conversation around social justice divisive? I would say the answer is yes. But sometimes the sort of division that it brings and the disruption that it brings can lead to unity because it's a redemptive kind of work. It's designed to bring people together and solve problems, not to permanently divide and keep people apart. And that's what the work, I believe, you and me and Threaded, that's what we're about. I think that's what the kingdom is about. I think that's what America says it's about. And I'm on board with that vision.
Yeah. And if you walk through the entire Bible and you start watching how God is moving toward the accomplishment of his mission, you will see him doing supernatural acts and then also doing supernatural acts through others that really goes with making things right, freeing those who are in slavery, providing for those on the margins, for widows and orphans, and trying to create a community that is just, mishpah, just in the word that goes along with just, righteousness. He's working for that. And when we see the final community in Revelation 7:9, we see a community that is in unity because there is the presence of justice. All the things have been made right. The reconciliation is fully complete. Reconciliation with God and man, and reconciliation between tribes, tongues, and nations. And if we can look at our current situation and try to work in such a way that we can get to the point where actually people are satisfied, they're not asking for more. The grievances are over. They recognize that justice has been done and that they are living a life where everyone can thrive and everyone has equal access. That's the community that God shows us in Revelation. And that's the dress rehearsal we're supposed to be creating for the world now, particularly in the people of God. So that's what we're pushing for. We want to see that Revelation 7 community here on earth in the body of Christ. We have the same spirit that creates it there, can create as much of it here as we can. And that's what we're pushing for. And if that's divisive, you can have it. I'll be the divisive and disruptive person. And so will the show, Colored Commentary, the place where we bring you all kinds of different lenses so that you can see the world through all the different colors and cultures, tribes, tongues, and nations that are out there. And so as you go about your walk and in your world, please stay colored.